Okay, the Zoom robot lady tells us we're recording. Declan, are you ready?
I am ready.
And I'm ready too. So let's get into it. I will pause for a moment and then do the intro. Hello there, and welcome back to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed. I believe this is the number one podcast for all things about Assassin's Creed. Is that right?
Possibly, but I cannot remember. It's been too long.
Welcome back, mate. How are you?
I'm doing great. I've been very excited about this. I've been up since 3 a.m. planning, so I am coffeeed up and I'm ready to go.
Happy days. And well, in case you don't recognize it, I guess most people will. My guest this week is Declan, the creator of this show originally in November 2019, I think. Um, Declan's been away for a while, and he's back as a special guest today. Now, Chris has been my regular co-host and companion for the last actually, do you know what? It's approaching something like 8 months that he's been recording with me, and it's been great. He's been great to have on the show, and he's got so much knowledge and experience. He's been good to record with. He's taking a little break, and Declan is desperate to talk about a subject. What is that subject?
It's a subject where I'm going to get pitchforks after me.
Oh yeah,
We are talking about social stealth, which is one of the core pillars of the franchise, along with parkour and everything else. But it is also a core feature that is not important to the franchise anymore, personally.
yeah.
And
Well,
that might get me a lot of hate.
it it won't get you hate because it's a statement of fact. Social stealth was part of the games and now isn't. And I think we're going to go into it now. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not. We've talked about this before. I'm not like a super deep gameplay guy, so I'm probably quite fuzzy on the details. And I'm basically Declan's going to be my guide because he's been. This was his pitch. This is something he wanted to talk about. I've realised we haven't done like the whole episode number. We are episode 170. Damn it! I should have looked it up in advance. What was the last episode? We haven't actually recorded for about a month. This is the worst intro to an episode ever. Okay, the last episode we did was 176, which was our Shadows gameplay reaction, which was published about a month ago. Now I've been busy with work. Chris has been busy with some other stuff. Declan, you've been busy with stuff as well. So this is the first time in a month we've been able to get together. So yes, this is episode 177. We are talking about social stealth, an area that I'm not an expert in. But maybe I can shed some light on that based on my recent Mirage permadeath run, where I did use social stealth quite a bit. Declan, do you want to get us started with your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So my thoughts is pretty much to start with, the problem with Assassin's Creed as a franchise, its main goal has been innovation instead of evolution. So every game has been an innovation, something new, something exciting, and it's kept the franchise alive for 15 years, and it's something I'm quite proud of Ubisoft for doing. But the problem is when you look at it closely, the last time social stealth was important was actually Assassin's Creed 1 because you used it.
Well, that's a bold statement.
It is, but
I mean, you're going to have to defend that.
I'll go through the games and hopefully give me some explanation. So AC1, you use it to get into Jerusalem, so you had to go through the monks. The Animus actually teaches you how to use it. Then Assassin's Creed 2 was a lot more verticality, so it favored parkour and stealth and combat. That kind of carried on to Rogue, not Rogue, Revelations with smoke bombs, the hook blade for more verticality and more assassination styles. Then 3, that was more like parkour again and combat focused. There's no need for social stealth in Black Flag, even though there's a ton of tailing missions, but realistically, the big core of Black Flag is exploration of piracy. Rogue, I'm not really too familiar with because I haven't played it in a long while. Unity is the biggest offender because Ubisoft has gone on record saying there was 10,000 unique NPCs in the game. But when you look at Unity's gameplay, it favors RPG mechanics and parkour over social stealth. Syndicate was the same. We had the gang system. We had the grapple hook. So it was more verticality, more parkour, more GTA style. And then with the newer games, it was really much more about an origins for the franchise. So it was more focused on like combat, training, exploration. So in all, it's just lost social stuff for years because they've been innovating different experiences. Mirage did try and bring it back, but the problem with Mirage, again, they focused on fleeing, disappearing, and parkour over actually need for social stuff. So you can do it, but you get more experience being high on the rooftops, using bombs to break line of sight, and using different tools. So when we look at Shadows not having social stealth, it shouldn't come as a surprise because when you look at the innovations they've done for stealth, something had to be taken away, and that was social stealth. But when you look at it closely, social stealth hasn't been relatively important till AC1, where we were actively using it to navigate into cities that we couldn't just walk into. The Animus taught us. So since then, Assassins, when people argue that social stealth is a core pillar, if you look at it closely, the biggest core pillars of the franchise is actually parkour and combat. They're the two biggest things that the franchise has always aimed to finesse and hone. And it's only Shadows that's now, near enough 15 years later, taking stealth back to the forefront, which makes no sense because a lot of their stealth mechanics come from Splinter Cell, which was around on the Xbox 360 era, just like AC1 to 3.
Yeah.
So it's took them a long time to get in-depth stealth, but something has to give, and that what's given is social stealth. So we just have to kind of, no offense, but roll with the ball at this point. We just have to understand that Assassin's Creed has to grow, and sadly, we're going to lose mechanics. But the core identity of Assassin's Creed for me has always been story, not just mechanics. So when we look at social stealth, if we want to get nitpicky, the last time it was important to the franchise for me is AC1 back in 2007, and we're in 2024.
I do want to get nitpicky. Okay, so AC1, I've only played it once and it's been a while. We know Chris plays AC1 multiple times every year. Can you complete the game without it? I'm guessing it makes it almost impossible because you get immediately detected by guards and attacked. Is that right?
Um, Theoretically, yes, because to get into the first city after what happened in Masaev, you actually can only get into that city by social blending with monks.
Oh yes, yes.
If
Okay.
you don't blend in, you cannot physically get into that city. You can fight your way in, but the proper way is to blend. And
Yeah.
AC1 was developed, I know it's going to cause a lot of controversy, but was developed more for ground based work than actually on the rooftops, which is why the rooftops are so dead and there's no guards. Because, yes, the parkour is fluid and fun. There's no real need to go on the rooftops except to break line of sight and get to the bureaus because there's nothing up there. So everything was on the ground level. So you needed social stealth, you needed blending in on benches and eavesdropping. That's how it was built. But AC2, with its verticality and its combat orientation, you kind of didn't really need it, even though it was there with the countesses to blend in, coin pouches. When you get to like the hook and blade that can zip line, do you really want to be on the streets when you can just climb a building in 10 seconds? It's kind of one of them things of by this point, you've got more tools to explore. Why choose the slower option of meandering through a crowd stealthily?
Well, I think we have a response to that, but we'll come to that in a sec. So, what you're saying is from AC2 up until probably Syndicate, it was an optional tool. You could choose to approach a target through a crowd, blending on benches, hiring courtesans or whatever, but it was an optional approach. Whereas in AC, when it was required, then in Origins, it was thrown away. Odyssey, the same. Social stealth was in Valhalla, theoretically, but let's be completely honest, it was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Mirage did bring it back, and it's great, I have to say. there's quite a few assassination missions where social stealth is fantastic as a way to approach it. It's definitely not very showy, and I can understand why from a almost like a showcase, quote unquote, fun way to play. You're right; it's not as exciting as parkouring over the roofs or anything like that. But it's especially that first assassination mission with Al Ghul. Doing it the social way is so satisfying. But definitely, it's been it's been varying levels of use and varying levels of effectiveness over the games. Now, the response, I think, which is a very good response. I need to find the. I put a request for comments out on our Twitter, on our community page, and on our Discord. So I'm going to read something to you here from Six Keys, which I think is a very good justification, shall we say, for social stealth as a mechanic. I'm just going to read three simple things, three things you might have heard a few times. Stay your blade from the flesh of the innocent. Hide in plain sight and never compromise the brotherhood. The purpose of social stealth is to express in gameplay the creed of the assassins. And I think it's entirely fair if someone says without that, it's not quite a complete game. I'll tell you one thought I have about this. Now, it's interesting. We've had quite a few comments from people saying, I never used it or didn't really bother, preferred other approaches. Honestly, I used to be the same. I've come to appreciate it over years, especially with my recent replay of Mirage. But I think social stealth, really, it's no different to a smoke bomb or a throwing knife or a trap or whatever tool, hook blade, rope launcher, name any tool you like. It is a tool in your arsenal to use how you see fit to approach or to a target or to leave a target area. And I think why not include it? Give players a range of tools, let them use the ones they like. What do you think about that, Declan?
I think the biggest issue I have with that statement is when you look at how Ubisoft has built Assassin's Creed, we're going to take Assassin's Creed 2 here. Hide in plain sight. They give Ezio a hidden blade attachment that is a gun. Theoretically, you cannot hide in plain sight with a hidden blade attachment that is a gun, because as soon as you shoot that off in a time where firearms is very limited, you're going to be spotted pretty quick. So it's kind of annoying because the franchise has played fast and loose with the tenants for years. It's second nature, but
now that's a very good comment. The franchise has played fast and loose, both in terms of story, characters, their motivations, their actions. But yeah, you make a good point there.
And I think it is valid, it should be a tool, but the argument I make against it being a viable option is, how do we want the franchise? Do we want innovation? So every time a new game comes out, they experiment with a deeper mechanic. So let's take Shadows, for example. Their innovation there is stealth, having the best stealth I've ever seen in a game, using light, prone. It's probably going to be the best version of stealth. If it works, different story. But having the idea there is good. Or do we want a franchise that will always have these same options every time with no innovation? And that's kind of the problem where Assassin's Creed has been since AC2, because you put AC1 and AC2 side by side, you will see it's not like minor difference like most sequels. It's blooming night and day from the color palette, pacing, combat mechanics. It's all an innovation. And then you take Brotherhood, and that's the same story. And then when you put Black Flag in the mix, Black Flag next to AC2 makes AC2 look crap in comparison because of the scope of the world.
You are desperate to cause an argument, aren't you, on the internet today?
I don't mean it. I kind of more mean it like if you look at the size of Black Flag's map, the scope of the details of the islands and the different stuff you can do, and compared to AC2, which was like a smaller map and a lot less to do compared to what you can do in Black Flag, you kind of see where they've tried to innovate it by blowing the world up, giving more people to do crafting options and
Mm,
more to do. So it's just a problem of the franchise from day one that these options, yes, should be available to fans. I have no quarrels because I would love to use them. I'm a fan who loves stealth, but I've come to love the franchise for taking risks because it doesn't always work. No. But when something doesn't work, I have never seen Ubisoft copy that mechanic. They
mm,
sometimes usually throw it in the bin. And if something works, they then try something new for the next game, which gets
yeah.
irritating, yes, because I would have liked to see Unity's parkour grow with like Syndicate and Origins. But when you look from a story perspective, Bayak, a Medjay who is a police of the people, do you really expect him to be doing backflips and wall ejects and being stealthily with people? Not really, because the Medjay is the people's police, so he has to show his face. He has to be there. He has to be, I'm a Medjay. This is what I do. I'm here to protect you. So
Mm,
it's one of these hard things of Assassin's Creed will never get right because you've got to mirror mechanics, history, and a character. You cannot have a character. So, like Arno, for example, fast, fluid. But would Arno work if he was slow, methodical, working for a crowd? Maybe not, because Arno is built for the agility, for the leaps and the jumps and the bounds. So, and then you look at Eivor, this big stocky Viking. Do you really expect her to be doing back ejects and everything, or do you expect her to be very heavy-handed with a weapon and very brutal? And it's kind of like a really annoying thing for the franchise to have done, but it makes sense because we have to take account of the history, the time period, and the characters. What are their physical and humane limitations, and what are they not? So, I know what the biggest issue with Shadows is Yasuke can't social stealth, and my argument is: do you really honestly think it's believable for this African American samurai who's alien to this country? No offense, do you really think it's possible for him to walk into a crowd and disappear?
no,
Oh,
and that makes sense. And his parkour will be limited compared to Naoe's as well. That makes sense. Um, but Naoe can't social stealth either.
yeah, and that is quite irritating that she doesn't have the social stealth. But when you look at her parkour movement, her grapple hook, it seems that she's going to be more favorable for rooftops and staying out of sight and using shadows. So taking out lanterns. So it's kind of that give and take. That's
Mm,
kind of the problem. What
mm,
would you rather have now? I do like people say there's no social stealth in Shadows from what we're seeing, but theoretically, looking at the dynamic weather and time, if you're in a bustling crowd and you take out a lantern and you hide in the shadows, isn't that social stealth? Yes, it's not one with the
no.
crowds or a bench, but you are in a public place disappearing into the shadows. It is a form of social stealth. It's not what we're used to, but you are being stealthily in a social environment. So it's
Mm,
should we maybe look at the different perspective of how we can use social stealth without thinking of the common ways of the crowd and all that? If we're in a city with tons of lights and we can knock the lights out, so more shadows for us to hide in, then we are being social stealth because we are walking with a crowd in the shadows. We're not in the crowd, but we are still invisible to the crowd because we're using the shadows or the rooftops. We're hidden in the crowd and we're still following our targets in a social environment, but we're hidden. We may not be like in the middle of a crowd or on a bench, which I love the benches, always have done, but we are having a form of social stealth if we look at that in this social environment. We are on a rooftop or we're using shadows. So sometimes maybe we have to take a step back and look at perspective of what is the social stealth. Is it limited to crowds and benches, or could we argue that a shadowy back alley to take on a target is also a form of social stealth?
I would say that's not really social stealth. I'd say that's environmental stealth. Um, Social stealth is the crowd, the civilians, the society that you live in, and hiding in amongst them. Um, we've had environmental stealth since AC3. What was the first game where you could hide in bushes? I think was it 3 or was it Black Flag? It
Free.
was
Because it
3.
was in the frontier, you could always like hide in the trees and do
Right.
cool
Okay.
stuff.
Okay. So that's been there for it. And the thing about everyone getting excited, upset about social stealth in shadows is it. I totally get it. Right. There's a tool that you like using, and it's not in the game, and that's frustrating. But we've got a whole new type of stealth that we've never had before. We've got this literal light and shadow stealth. It's environmental, but we have control over it in terms of we can use our is it a shuriken, a throwing star, to put lights out. We can plan a mission for a certain time of day when the lighting will benefit us. And I think that's going to be fascinating. The other thoughts I've had about shadows is, and again, we've only seen a few clips. What have we seen? 10 minutes of gameplay. And of course, they're picking certain missions to show off some aspects of the gameplay without showing us everything. But all we've seen so far is big castles now infiltrating. And I think it's one mission they showed us from multiple sort of different viewpoints. It's possible that all of the sort of, let's call them black box assassination missions, there might not be, but let's say all the major targets, if they're all in these large castles and your ordinary civilian population aren't allowed in, then where's the benefit in blending? Because you can't blend to pass into the castle anyway. Maybe. I think that I can immediately think of a counter argument, which is, and this goes back to liberation. It would be awesome if, let's say, there was a rotating guard pattern. Could you knock out a guard, steal their uniform, put it on, and then use that? And it's a form of social stealth to pass into the fortress and get close to the target. Let's judge it when it releases. Are we definitely feeling that the game is missing something? Or actually, does it make sense? The other thought I have about social stealth, I'm going to read a comment here, because this comes into one of the common Assassin's Creed fan comments, let's say. So I'm going to read the comments. So social stealth should be featured in every Assassin's Creed game. Okay. It's a core pillar which makes Assassin's Creed, I can't even say it. It is a core pillar of what makes Assassin's Creed special and unique. Yeah, that's fair. The fact that Shadows doesn't feature fluid and responsive parkour that we know of, I mean, there's still something to be seen there, makes it seem as if the Quebec team continue to confirm their reputation for ignoring the rules established previously. So it is fair to say that there is a fairly long running thread of criticism from some fans about projects led by Quebec. And let's be blunt, most of that criticism focuses on Odyssey. And I've seen quite a few people, some of the comments, replies you've had to our request for comment, it's Quebec. Quebec games are rubbish. Quebec don't respect Assassin's Creed, etc., etc. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know whether if the Quebec creative directors sit down and go, with a big red pen, they cross off all the bits of Assassin's Creed they don't like. Maybe they do. I kind of doubt that, if I'm honest. But anyway,
One thing I will,
go on, mate.
one thing I will say that's kind of irritating about that remark is it's kind of ignoring a huge, glaring gameplay thing we saw discussed in the Ubisoft Forward, and that is Yasuke attacked a guard in a civilian area to get information on the black box mission.
Yeah.
The narrative director did acknowledge that whole scenario could have been played as Naue.
Yeah.
Because the entire game, up until black box missions, can be played as Naoe or Yasuke. So one could argue with in that moment you could have been Naoe, and if it was nighttime based on the dynamic weather, you could have used lights, shadows to social stealth, or even blending in because there was a lot of crowds walking around there, and so you there is an argument there that if that mission was played with Naoe, there could have been more stealth options, more social stealth. It's unfair to do so much criticism on Shadows based on the gameplay because every gameplay we've seen is Yasuke and Naoe is two different game modes, yes, but they have gone on record to say if you want to play the entire game as Naoe or Yasuke, it's possible until certain story points that are more
Yeah,
Naoe or Yasuke orientated. So the argument there is kind of unfair because if they chose Naoe for that point of view, then you would have got a very different sort of area where the black box mission that showcased the details of the grappling hook and the stealth, that would have kind of been more of a run and gun with Yasuke, and people would then complain that, well, why did now I get this little stealth bit in a city, but now this big important black box mission is Yasuke? So for a gameplay director to do a showcase, they had to find a way to showcase both characters' talents, and it's better in that gameplay to show Yusuke as the big, heavy guard killing machine in a town, and then for the whole stealth options, use Nawe at night, and
yeah, yeah.
that's kind of
You're
fair. And
right. We haven't seen. We need to see the same mission played with both characters to see what the different options are. Maybe Naue could have tempted that guy into a back alley and then assassinated him quietly, or I don't know, or waited till nighttime when he was sleeping. So you do make a good point there about the different approaches.
and if we look at Quebec's track record, I think sometimes
I want to talk about that right now, mate. Do not worry.
if you take a look at Syndicate, for example, a Quebec-led title, the gang system no different from Brotherhood's recruitment system, just a different face paint, a different mechanic. It was in Brotherhood. We've been for ages. Grappling Hook. If you want to get technical, Grappling Hook first came out in Assassin's Creed 1 Bloodlines for the PSP. So it's been at the core of the franchise since the very beginning. It
Mm,
wasn't just a Quebec thing for Syndicate of let's do a grappling hook. It was there back in the beginning. And if you look at how Ubisoft has always built Assassin's Creed, it is not always just been Montreal on their own or Quebec on their own. There's always other studios involved. Now,
yeah,
you can't. Is Odyssey the perfect AC game? Possibly not. But is it the most fun for replayability? Yes, because there's tons of options for tools and stealth. And then if you take away the story of Cassandra, Alexios, and the Order of Ancients, that story could have been told by Montreal, and people would have eaten it up because it's a similar story to Bayax. If you look closely, a lot of stuff that happens in Odyssey closely resembles to some stuff that happened with Bayak, which was Origins and Montreal. If we look at Valhalla, all the bugs, all the glitches, all the issues Valhalla
oh
had,
man, I
that was
really want to talk about this point because yeah,
that was a Montreal-led studio with other studios involved. Your attack on Quebec based on Odyssey is, in my opinion, and I don't mean to be harsh, is invalid because when you look at Syndicate, which is what a cult classic in the franchise, was a Quebec-led title, and it featured a ton of Assassin's Creed gameplay from social stealth was in it, not a big bit, but you could have done it. The gang system brought the Brotherhood system back. There was tools. There was different approaches.
Syndicate is a classic Assassin's Creed game. There's a piece of Eden. There's a load of Templar targets. You have a hidden blade. Oh, people do get those knickers in a twist about Jacob having a top hat, and I cannot even conceive of getting angry about that. Honestly, I find it just absolutely bizarre. But you're right. It's okay. I'm going to lay it out, and this is really kind of harsh to certain projects, I guess. But I find the Quebec bad, Montreal good argument just totally nonsensical. Um, what you said earlier is a good point. These are always multi-studio projects, although there's always a lead studio that kind of sets the tone. These are always multi-studio projects. Um, it, it's just this just cracks me up. Let's look at some game releases, right? Valhalla. I don't even know what to say. Um, a bloated, buggy, frustrating mess, as you said a moment earlier, with the least satisfying parkour in the franchise. Sure, there was social stealth, but did you use it? No, you just ran up and over the wall because you didn't need to use it, and it was really frustrating to use. Um, their previous led project was Origins. Now, Origins has got a lot going for it: the world, the side quests, the vocal performances. The Hidden Ones DLC is amazing. That's an incredible DLC. But honestly, for me, Origin story really falls apart, especially in the third act when suddenly the pacing is off. Do you remember who the bad guy is? Because it's not Caesar. It's I don't. I think Origins is a very well made game, and we know that the story was being changed and edited while the game was being developed, and major changes were being made. Can you blame the team for that? Maybe not, but you have to kind of judge the product by what you get in the end and what you pay money for. And for me, Origins really it's quite confusing at the start with all the time jumps, but it does get into a flow. It's absolutely beautiful. Can't fault Bayek's performance. There's no fucking social stealth in Origins. And I feel like people make a checklist of things they want in a game. And because Odyssey doesn't have them, they mark Quebec down, but they don't apply the same set of tests to Montreal led projects. And that's very strange to me. If social stealth is a requirement, then you have to put Origins and Odyssey in the same bucket. You can maybe put Valhalla in there, but also if you didn't, that's fine. Let's look further back. Let's look at Unity. Unity is my personal favorite game of the franchise. I love that game. It has social stealth, tick. Unity was and remains to this day a bit of a mess. That's a Montreal-led project. I find it weird that if someone was to say, Unity has social stealth, tick, hidden blade, tick, the guy wears a hood, tick, therefore it's a good game. But if it's really unreliable and you get detected instantly and it's completely unsatisfying to play, how can you say that's good? People have this very strange blind spot to me where they just don't apply their personal scoring system fairly. There are, if you want to, and that's what I like about Odyssey is the flexibility. There are ways to play Odyssey in a more, this is a bit rubbish, but a sort of Creed-like fashion. You can summon a lieutenant. That's like calling in a member of the Brotherhood. That's an ability. You have this ability called Vanish. Now, all it is, it's a blinding flash from your Piece of Eden, your Spear of Leonidas. That's kind of like a smoke bomb, so that you can break contact or blind your enemies. You don't have social stealth. That's true. Neither does Origins. You don't have smoke bombs, but you can use your Vanish skill for that. We got smoke bombs or smoke arrows back in Valhalla, but they were tied to adrenaline, which made no fucking sense and were completely frustrating to use. So I find this a Quebec bad, Montreal good argument just bizarre because it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. The other point I want to make, and this connects to Shadows, this also connects to Origins. You were saying earlier about Bayek, we had lots of games, so from AC1 to Syndicate, where we had quite a sort of, although Black Flag is actually a bit of an outlier, but we had a structure where the protagonist either was a member of the Brotherhood or became a member of the Brotherhood and killed some bad guys. And then with the more recent games, we've had a very different set of approaches. So we've had a Medjay, which some people call a policeman. Amit, our Egyptologist friend who's been on the show quite a few times, she would describe him as an educated soldier. We had a mercenary, Cassandra or Alexios. We had a Viking who was very much not interested in joining the Brotherhood, but for some reason that gets a pass anyway. And then we've with Mirage, we've gone back to that traditional style. So Mirage kind of goes in the other bucket. And I think if you're having these protagonists, so a Magi, a mercenary, and a Viking, they are not following the creed because at least for two of them it didn't exist. And Eivor says, "No, I don't fight that way. I'm not interested." If you have characters with these very clear, what's the right word? Is archetype the right word? Might be, not sure. Very clear characters of a certain social status or certain employment, let's say, then does it not make sense for the gameplay to match that? What you're right. Why would Bayek hide? You know, he's a policeman. He's a keeper of the peace. People need to know him and see him. Cassandra's a mercenary. No one likes her. No one talks to her. She just takes her drachmae and does whatever. So it makes sense that she doesn't hide. She's carrying a literal piece of Eden in her hands. So it makes sense that she can do certain things and make certain moves that mortals can't. Eivor is a Viking. She wants to fight with her axes and her shield. So while I really didn't like the movement in Valhalla, I can sort of understand that maybe it was changed because the movement needs to fit the character. And this is not a character that would have climbed over those. This is a character that would have smashed the front door in and, ransacked the town. Coming to Shadows, and again, we have a question mark here because we've not seen much and we need to wait and see. I think it'll be a shame if social stealth isn't an option, and I've got more to say on that in a minute. But if once we play the game, it makes sense from a more complete view of the overall flow of the game and the characters we play as, where the mission design, the larger open world that we've got with Shadows compared to Mirage, if it makes sense because it supports the character fantasy, the player fantasy, that social stealth isn't there, then I'm okay with it. I still think it's a bit of a shame that it's not an option. You might be able to narratively say, well, do you know what? The Japanese Brotherhood didn't use social stealth at this time because they didn't need to. I'm okay with it. But I do find this strange judgment of Quebec it just doesn't stand up to any thought of all of the games we've had over the last 10 years. Final point I want to make about this is where this whole social stealth question is a bit of a shame is a lot of work was done to make it work in Mirage. They built missions around it. We've already mentioned Al Ghul, the first sort of major assassination target for Basim, but there are others where you can use it. And it's awesome. I used it multiple times. You infiltrate the big prison by bribing a merchant and picking up a chest of tea to carry in with him. So you are acting as his assistant. You are blending in with the merchants, and it's awesome, and it works really reliably, and it's very satisfying to use. And it's kind of a shame that work isn't being, and this is actually something you said earlier, Ubisoft don't seem to return to the same idea, or at least not immediately, maybe 10 years later. And having kind of fixed detection in Mirage compared to Valhalla and, made the social stealth actually a impactful part of the gameplay, it's a real shame not to take that and use it and iterate on it. Now, from a sort of development and project management point of view, it's possible that Shadows was already so far along in its development before, or by the time the Mirage dev team had done their development, done the testing, got social stealth working reliably. So it's just possible that those two projects are running in parallel. We know that. It's just possible that, Shadow's team had to start closing down development of different systems before the Mirage team had finished. So maybe it's a matter of timing. Perhaps the next game, perhaps Hexe, or whatever comes next, we assume it's Hexe, perhaps that will iterate on some of the work done on Mirage. And we'll get social stealth back. I don't know. I've spoken for about 10 minutes. I'm sorry, mate. Back to you.
It's okay. I think I never wanted to pull this card, but I think I should. The most revered figured head in the franchise actually give an explanation to this that we've that was actually on our show, and that's Darby McDevitt. He has explained to on an interview we did that you can't split history into black and white. So you can't always take certain parts of history and say, well, that's an assassin, that's an Templar, because with more recorded history or more known events, by becoming something black and white with, well, that's an assassin, that's a Templar, you can provoke a lot of problems, a lot of cultural debates. So when you take that approach and put it onto a gameplay perspective like social stealth, doesn't it make sense that if you cannot split a history to black and white of what's an assassin, what's a Templar, then realistically you cannot then split black and white of what mechanics will work and what mechanics won't, because you then get to a problem of oh, I want to see this time period. Okay, let's put it in. But in this time period, there was a lot less people. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to overpopulate the cities for social stealth. Okay, if you do that, then you're ruining the history of that time period because there was a lot less people. Okay, then we'll remove social stealth and we'll put it back to a realistic amount of people in that time zone. Yeah, but social stealth's not in it, so it's not good. And then you get this paradox of where it's like, well, do you then only want history where it's highly densely areas, specifically tall buildings so you can park on social stealth? Or are you willing to accept that in some periods of history, the population density in them areas may limit social stealth? The way the buildings and the archetypes work may limit parkour and movement. That's where you really get this bone crunching idea that Assassin's Creed is built on history as our playground. If Assassin's Creed starts picking and choosing periodic moments in history to fulfill an assassin archetype fantasy, then you will run into an area where the history is lost to overcompensate for gameplay mechanics and the story suffers. When we look at Shadows and the time period and everything, yes, there is a lot of highly dense areas, but a shinobi is more working in the shadows, the rooftops, they're assassins. They're not known for just walking down to Costa in the middle of a crowd to gank a guy. They're known for, in a lot of like Western culture media, when you look at ninja work, you never see ninjas in the middle of a town center just chilling in the crowd.
That's a really good point.
You
What you
see them in
said
the
there.
shadows,
Yeah.
the rooftops. And this is where you've got to take a step back and say, well, I want social stuff fantasy. I get it. I do as well. I want to be on the park benches. I want to be like hiring guards, sneaking. I want all that. But I want my shinobi fantasy at the same time. I want my historical ideology of that time period. So if someone like Naue for shinobi wants to focus more on using prone, bushes, tools, shadows, parkour, then give me that. Don't force a character into a scenario where you're going to take an assassin ideology checkbook that is then going to ruin how a character feels, how a character moves, and how a history or time period feels. And I think Valhalla is a very good example because you look at London, it is highly dense and you can do social stealth. So should Ubisoft have put a huge mechanic in there for social stealth, but when you walk out, you're in countryside? Well, no, you're not going to use it in the countryside because it's England. If you live in England now, you will know we are 90% blooming countryside. If I was a real life assassin in modern day, I would never use social stealth because if I'm going to the next town over, I'm walking through farm fields and hedgerows, so I'm going to focus more on environmental stealth. But to then for them to be like, well, okay, so we want social stuff everywhere. We're going to highly densify this country with more AI, more people. That's unrealistic. That's goes back to the argument of AC1 and crossbows. What about historical accuracy? You can't have it both ways. You can't.
Now, we all
Yeah,
know the crossbow wasn't removed for historical accuracy, don't we?
yes, but it's
Okay,
become a
okay, good.
meme
Just
in the
checking, just checking.
community.
Because
But
we're going to get letters about that if I don't make that clarification right now. Actually, it was removed for balance. Anyway, sorry. Back to you.
but it's just kind of the viewpoint that I've had since 2007 that if I want this history as my playground Assassin's Creed game, I don't want a company to overdense areas that we're not known to be densified or add buildings that don't exist. The beauty of Syndicate and Unity is their one-to-one scale of cities. That is beautiful. They did it brilliantly. I don't want that in like middle of blooming Valhalla because these huts probably weren't as massive as buildings. They were small one-floored shack huts for you to sleep on the floor. So, oh, give me parkour, give me social stuff. My argument is, what's the point? If you want this Viking Age assassins, you can't have the assassin ideology unless you're going to destroy the world and create it to fit your perspective. And Darby even said it himself. The length of a lot of areas was shortened, but it created a fishbowl effect. And if you had that fishbowl effect of you could stand in York and see London on a map,
I remember. Yes, yes.
people are going to complain that that's not realistic. So they
Mm,
stretch the map to make more sense. And
mm,
again, I'm English, you're English. We know that going from one area to other is countryside. York is in the middle of the Dales. It's fells, fields, farmlands. London is city. Realistically, if you, as someone who travelled to London from Carlisle to London for the orchestra, I counted about a million farm fields before I hit blooming civilization. I felt like go
yeah.
from sticks to civilization. So
So, okay. So, do you think then we again we don't know exactly what all the roadmap details are, but there was a comment in the last couple of years from one of the lead people on Assassin's Creed that future games would not try to cater to everyone, and that there's kind of a suggestion that the games would kind of alternate between more open world, like Shadows, Valhalla, Odyssey, Origins, and more limited scope, Mirage, Syndicate, Unity. Personally, I'm fine with that. I love an open world, but I also, I mean, as you know, I've talked about it enough in the last few months. I frigging love a city-based game, man. Mirage, I think it's damn good. Um, I'm happy with that variety, actually. So my question for you is, or maybe just an observation: are you saying that for future larger scale open world Assassin's Creed games, we don't need it, but for the smaller scale city based games, social stealth should be a feature?
pretty much, yeah, because the way I took that comment is it's a genius move because you can then cherry pick history moments in a city and have the social stealth, or you can cherry pick a moment like feudal Japan where there wasn't a lot of cities, so you may be doing a lot of countryside roaming, so you don't need social stealth. And it is actually a very smart move because you can then, instead of destroying the franchise by making a limited amount of historical games, you can then cherry pick your history moments and build the assassin ideology around that moment in time, and everybody gets everything. So if there is a city-based game where the buildings are quite small, so there's more crowds for you to blend in, great move. But if you get an open world where it's a little bit more countryside and you're chasing Templars, so you're focusing more on parkour and dodging and environmental stuff, perfect. Everybody wins. So I think it's a genius move and it's one I actually support because I like Mirage because of that small city, the breath of fresh air from Valhalla, and
Yeah,
I love exploring. But I'm raring to go back to an open world because I want that intricacy of learning new movements, learning new pathways. Because when you look at the sides of Valhalla to Mirage, there is a lot more options in Valhalla to approach a target because there's a wider area for you to explore. Where Mirage is very condensed, so there's limited based on that map. So a bigger open world will give you more black box mission ways to approach because you'll have a wider area from north, east, south, west to explore. So if it's like a 10-kilometer map, you may have 2 kilometers from north, east, south, and west. Whereas in a 1 kilometer map, north, east, south, and west directions could become like zero point 0.2 kilometers. So it
yeah,
limits your movement and movability. So trying to do a focus where every game cherry picks the assassin ideology to fit into a history would be a boon for the franchise because a fan may go, well, I don't want that open world, so I'm going to spend all my money on this city based. You're still driving fans to the franchise and you're still retaining fans by giving him the mechanics we know and love. But you're also then having a doorway open to experiment and try new mechanics and new ways to enhance combat, stealth, and parkour. And the true core pillars, in my opinion, for the franchise since day one is the combat, the stealth, and movement. That's the true pillars because Assassin's Creed 1, you had combat, you had movement, you had stealth. That's an ideology that they followed for years, and they just cherry pick which one of them moments they should develop. So Unity, they developed
Okay. I've
movement.
just, sorry, mate, I'm going to interrupt you there. A little bit of a penny has just dropped in my brain. Okay. I got to try and think this thought through, and you're going to tell me where I'm wrong. So, early games, AC1, social stealth. You could on PC you would, I think you would hold spacebar, and Altair would sort of adopt a praying pose so that you look like a monk and you wouldn't attract any attention. And we've spoken about how social stealth evolves. Newer games, environmental stealth, bushes up in the trees, whatever. Here's a question for you, and because I don't remember the earlier games well enough to know how this works. With the newer games, and we've seen it. For example, Ubisoft have shown us some of like they're almost like developer views, so they how they were debugging, particularly with Mirage. With the newer games, the guards have vision cones where they will see you, and then their meter will increase, and when it fills, you get detected, and you're in combat. So it's the newer games are more about avoiding those vision cones, not getting seen. Doesn't necessarily mean hiding in a bush. It can just mean staying far enough away or climbing over a roof or whatever. Did the early games also have that vision cone idea, or was it all about your profile status? High profile, low profile, blended, not blended? I don't know enough about the early games, but what I'm wondering is, and I'm quite sure that someone will comment below or they'll message us on Discord. That's absolutely fine. Was social stealth needed in the early games because it was the only way to kind of make detection sort of a playable system that you had to understand as the games developed, particularly maybe more flexibility, more processing power with newer games, where the games could start to model guards' vision, their vision cones, and so on. There wasn't a need for social stealth so much because the player would manage their detection a different way by taking a different route, staying far enough away, and kind of tinkering with that vision cone and that SSI status. I wonder if there's something there, but I don't remember the early games well enough to know exactly how they handled detection. Do you know how it worked?
I don't know from a technical standpoint, but I do know in AC1 your detection meter was there was a little bit of a detection meter, as well based on the puppeteer system, so your profile.
Okay.
AC2, you if you were on a rooftop, the guards did really spot you, like what you're doing up there. So they would have like an indication system. So the field of vision has always been there, but I do actually agree
Okay.
with you. I think as technology's grown, they've modeled it differently and they've evolved it. So they've tried to find new ways to do it. So Unity is the biggest one. They created the shadow outlines in Unity.
Yes.
So
Last known position indicator.
yeah, and that was a very clever way of modeling your field of vision. I think that was the first time they used it, and it worked really well. But when you look at Unity as well, it kind of falls back on mechanics. Even though you've got that last known position field of view, Arno is so good at going parkour up and down. Do you really need social stealth if you can do some insane wall ejects up and wall ejects down? And I think that's just the whole point. It just goes back to is the give and take system.
Um, I mean, it does go back to the answer I would have to that in Unity, and it, to be fair, applies to all the games. You don't need it, but if it's a mechanic, build an assassination mission or two around it. Why not? Because then that creates gameplay variety. So you've got a mission like, oh my God, Siver in Notre Dame, you can social stealth. Can you social stealth through the main gates, or will you always get detected? I think you will. You're probably generally going to go in through the windows on the up in the ceiling. But then La Freniere, there's a lot of social stealth in that mission. So you could look at, and to be fair, Mirage does the same, different approaches for different missions. So you might say, from a gameplay point of view and keeping it interesting, why not have social stealth as a tool, and then each main assassination mission kind of exercises a different muscle, so uses a different set of tools. But you don't have to. You can run in the front door and kill the guy if you want, but the missions are designed to make you as a player play different ways to keep it interesting. That's maybe that's a better way of approaching it.
I think the best way I could answer that is by because I know it's off kind of different, but well, I'm going to take the mobile game that I play a lot because I speak to the developers quite regularly with them. And the biggest problem them developers face is when a new mechanic is added, you then have to go back and see how it interacts with other mechanics. And then if we take Unity again, they created 10,000 intricate AIs for the
Yeah,
crowd system to take the processing power of the PS4. So you then have to take in consideration of, as well, I'm going to go back to the mobile game that I play. When you look at all the systems in play, to us as non-developers going, well, you could have done this for a black box, you could have done that. It is a good, valid point. But then you got to think, well, hang on a minute, from a developer standpoint, how much would a social stealth interact with a certain code? How much would they have to pull out? Because in the mobile game I played, there was a new mechanic added the other day, and all it does is it changes the color of one of the gems to a different color and adds like a very small inconsequent effect compared to other abilities. However, to put that in, it broke the game in seconds because that small, minute bit of code, as the developer told me, was only 3 lines long. But what they didn't realize is they didn't make it match up with 1,000 lines of code for something else. So it's kind of one of them things that when you look at it as a building blocks, you can do all this, you can do all that. But if you take a step back and think, we're looking at like the motion capture, how that works, the way the environment has to work, the day and night system from from shadows and dynamic weather. How much of that coding may be affected or stripped away if they added social stuff? So it's one of those things of, from a consumer point of view, it's hard for us to see the intricate details. But if we were in that boardroom and judging by the size of games now and intricate for details, everybody wants 4K graphics. So and look at Unreal Engine 5, add a new Lumi, new ray tracing. You got to think of all those little pieces. And it's like, well, social stuff, you'll then have to code in the mechanics. So all those like clothing and facial details of the NPCs aren't being clipped by your character now being social stealthing, or you don't want your cloak going through the arms of an NPC, so you'll have to do like a detection system, so it's like a collision course, so your clothing bounces off the NPC. When you kind of take those little things in from a consumer, it's like, well, you could have done it, you could have done it. And the answer is yeah. And they potentially should have in a lot of games. But until we can see the building blocks and the line of coding and how intricate the coding they're running with, we don't know that maybe they tried it, but they couldn't get the weapons to not clip into the NPCs. So again, it goes back to AC1 with the crossbow that was removed for balance. It could be as simple as that, as, do you really want this skinny assassin with a sword as big as his body walking through a crowd and it's just chopping everyone in half, because that breaks immersion? So could they fix it, or is it easy just to remove it and focus on a different mechanic? And it could be something as simple as that, or it could just be as egregious as we all believe Ubisoft is that they just don't want it. And then
yeah,
it's, as we're consumers, it's very hard for us to take that step back and think as a developer, but as someone who plays a Magic the Gathering puzzle quest game that adds a ton of new mechanics every time a new set is released. And you then speak to the developers and how they have to then take the game's been running since 2015, so it's about a good 9 years. Have to take 9 years worth of code and make it work with this very small feature. And if it doesn't, it breaks the game. And when you start breaking the game, that's when people complain. And then sometimes it's easy just to say, well, you know what, let's not add it because we don't want to break a game. So I don't think there's an easy answer. I think until we could sit down with a developer and be like, let's look at your coding, there is potential for it to be there. It should be an option. There should be black box missions. But until we know how coding works or how the engine's running, it's not fair, in my opinion, as consumers to then criticize the lack of it until we understand, was it possible and chose not to? Or was it too difficult to put in while breaking something that you decided it was easier to drop the resources needed to create it and focus
Yeah,
resources on another part?
that's a fair point. They might have looked at it and said, we need to rebuild this system, or it's too late to copy over the work, or even the work done by Bordeaux and Mirage, because it's an older version of the engine. That coding isn't compatible. So we will have to rebuild detection and social stealth. And that's a lot of dev time. We want to spend the dev time elsewhere. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. All right, I want to move to other comments we've had from listeners. How about we do this? I read the comment out, and then you give me your reaction.
Oh god, this is where I get in trouble.
Okay, so I'm going to go through. It's okay. You're fine. You're fine. I'm going to read the comments that we got on our Twitter post. So the message I put out was, we'd love to hear your opinions on social stealth. Is it required? Will shadows lack something without it? And did you use social stealth in earlier games? So let's do this as like a kind of quick fire round. Okay, here we go. Assassin's Creed News says social stealth is essential. Declan?
I think it's essential from a consumer, but from a developer, it might not be possible. So that would be my answer.
Okay. Hayete, previous guest on the show a few times. This was his comment. Hot take. Anyone that complains about social stealth is avoiding the obvious. Someone in grandiose armor and visible weapons is not blending in with two guys in simple clothing next to a fruit stall 2 meters away from the enemy. It's not needed, and it's unrealistic in many incarnations. That's a fair point.
I kind of agree because the older games had, well, Altair did have like white robes that kind of blended in,
but he had that massive throwing knife belt, and then the sword leather belt over his shoulder and everything. But yeah.
And then you look at like AC2 with the different colored cloak systems. You know, you can be
can I just say something that will get me lynched? Ezio's robes in AC2 are ridiculous. I'm sorry. I know they're iconic, and this is going to get me cancelled, but I think they're absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, yes, I think Hayate does make an interesting point. So where is it? We had another comment here, and it connects to what Hayate said. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so Adam Aircraft, he posted quite a long series of messages. Where was the bit that he mentioned it? Social stealth is great as a concept, but Ubisoft doesn't lean into it enough to fully flesh it out, and it has slowly eroded over time. Yeah, we've mentioned that. He then says, social stealth was never used to its full potential aside from Liberation. We've spoken about Liberation and the disguise system many times here. And this connects to Hayate's point. I'd kind of like, if we're going to do social stealth, then we should have disguises. We should dress as actually, Arno had the disguise, quote unquote, ability, didn't he? But we should have that. We should dress as the crowd, and that should open up different assassination routes or traversal options, exactly like it did with Aveline in Liberation. If you want to dress as an assassin, you're going to stand out, but you can parkour, or you have access to a wider variety of tools. I would love for the game, or a future game, to bring this back. If you want to really role play as a member of as a civilian, then you dress as a civilian, and you have to account for that, and you have different movement. What do you think?
I'll answer that with one word: transmog system. Think it through.
Okay, well, I know what you mean, but transmog is more of a. Okay, we're going to get nerdy now. Transmog is a non-diegetic part of the gameplay.
Yes, but other games I've played use cosmetics, which isn't armor or anything, cosmetics as a way to give a bonus. So, civilian clothing as a cosmetic could give you 10% less detection time, but it
Oh, wait a
overrides
minute. When you
armor.
say cosmetic, are you meaning it's just for show for us, the player, or are you meaning that it's actually an outfit the character wears that has different benefits?
Both. In one of the MMOs I play, they have a transmog system like Odyssey. But if you put on a guard's uniform in the transmog, you still get your like weapons and your armor and all your stats. But that guard's uniform lowers detection in guard quarters because they think you look like a guard. So
Okay.
it's basically, I think, if they want to do it right, allow us to buy like street clothings that we can wear as a transmog system that will then override our armor's appearance. And because we look like a street person, we blend in. So you don't need this big fancy
Yeah.
coding. Just if you had like a line of coding, so if guard sees X clothing, they think detection is reduced by 10, for example, and we just put street clothing as a transmog, we're still this like big badass assassin with a sword the size of our legs, but the transmog makes us look like we're wearing civilian clothing so the guards don't detect us. It's basically
I know what you
liberation.
mean. I would rather have it as an outfit, though, where you have to give something up. You can dress up as a guard, but then you've limited. So it's a trade off. That's how I think it should be. Otherwise, it's just a free bonus.
I want both. I'm greedy.
All right, I'm going to read the next comment. This is a very mysterious comment from Frigalite. I think social stealth is a good thing. I also use it in real life. Curious.
So do I. So do I.
Now, Sir Dwulfger, he's made a very cheeky comment. Shadows won't lack anything. It will lack everything. Now, that's a very negative view, Mr. Dwulfger. And we don't we try to be positive here. So I shall just chuckle and move on. All right. Dan D says it's a cool mechanic, but it was really only properly used in AC1 and sparingly in most other games. That's actually what you were saying, even right at the start. I don't mind if it exists, but they need to actually include it in a fun and meaningful way that people want to use. I'd love to see it, but most games don't offer that. I think that's kind of what you were saying at the start, wasn't it?
Pretty much, he's got my kind of viewpoint. Like, as I've always
Mm,
said for years, why use it in AC2 when you can just run on the rooftops, stabbing archers, air assassinating? So, if it was a
mm,
fun way to use it, I would do it.
yeah, understood. Livale says, honestly, I don't think I've ever instinctively used social stealth in an AC game. I've done it for trophies or objectives because it was required, but I've never wanted to or felt like it was useful. I know I won't miss it in shadows. I'm in a similar situation, and I think I wonder, and it'd be quite hard. Maybe we could survey this, but I do wonder if players like me who played the newer games first that didn't have it, we just got used to not using it. So when we went back and played the older games, we just didn't use it because we didn't need it because the newer games had trained us to play in a certain way. What do you think?
I would say it's more on how you view the franchise when you first started. So, I started in 2007. So, I'm a long time fan. I've used it, but I've never saw a need for it in a lot of newer games because more fun things to do. So,
I had to step away for a moment to open the window in the office because it is really warm in here. Sorry
how
about
do you
that.
think I feel hiding under my duvet for audio quality? I feel
But
like
your audio is so clean, no reverb. It's lovely. Sorry, mate.
no,
These are
but
the sacrifices we make.
I'm sweating. I feel like a 5-year-old again. I'm a
Oh
little
my God.
then I've got 10 pillars stacked up and everything.
Well, I tell you what, we're about an hour and 10 into this. So let's rattle through this and then wrap up because I don't want you to overheat. Caramel Kaiteki says, I don't think social stealth is required. I barely used it. Shadows will be fine. I would only ever use it if it was required to get past a certain point. So I suppose that's interesting, and that's a good point. So if a mission requires it, use it, but otherwise you would never optionally choose to use it.
Because that's Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed's like your playstyle. It has been since AC2, so I think it's a fair comment.
Yeah. Lucas here actually makes a similar comment to what you were saying earlier about the different styles of worlds, open world, sort of small scale world. Social stealth works best in densely populated environments in maps like New York, different cities in the Caribbean. Social stealth was more as an evasive tool. In Brotherhood, you could use it to get close to your target and maybe even assassinate them if you did it right. So yeah, different games had different levels of emphasis. Any comment?
No, it's one I fully support, and I think it's just let's see where the future holds. Because if we've got separate games that could do it, then it's going to
Yeah,
be a boon for the franchise.
yeah. Spooky Shape here makes a comment that actually kind of connects to what we were saying with Hayate's comment earlier. So social stealth is cool, but never properly expanded on. If it's added, I want some serious depth. Imagine foregoing armor and weapons to raise your blend status. Now that would be cool. So imagine you just put like a coat on and you're blended, but you can still only get to a certain distance from the guards before you detect it. But imagine you put like a full outfit on, take your swords and daggers off, then you can get really close. That would be interesting. And you've got to balance off how blended you want to be versus sort of how flexible you can move. That would be cool.
Ubisoft, take note of this comment because I want this as well.
And that comment is copyright Spooky Shape on Twitter. That's cool. I like that idea of having a blend status meter. I'm going to find our. We had a few thoughts as well on Discord. So, do you know what? Mike here makes a really good point, and I could totally understand this point from a lot of players. I never actually really understood what social stealth was. Is it in crowds or is it another type of hiding? Because I feel like I've always been able to hide by just focusing on line of sight. So that's more about balancing that guard, viewing cone, and viewing distance. And that's a fair point. You know, it's something that some people would have just skipped over. I certainly did when I went to play the early games, just in recent years. I really didn't. I have to say, how the hell I ever completed AC1, I do not know because my brain just didn't get it. That if you hold spacebar and Altair has got his head down and praying, he's kind of invisible, and that just didn't click for me. I've learned since then. I would play AC1 so differently now. What else? Mr. Nose, that's Andrew, who's been on the show actually just recently. He defines social stealth as hiding in a group of people, but it's really more than that. It's the idea that at any given place, at any given time, someone is hiding in your line of sight, people, bushes, haystacks, just waiting for the target. And I've missed that for a while. Have you missed it, Declan? Sounds like
Mm,
maybe not.
no, because I was doing a lot of that in Valhalla. I was very in the bushes, sniping with arrows, and then when they walked past,
Yeah,
I just jumped out with hidden blade.
yeah. Serverlands Flower says, for me, social stealth is using the social environment, sitting on a bench, shuffling into a crowd, not a cloud, shuffling into a crowd, joining a random conversation at a market stall, or as in Valhalla, pretending to be working on something. So one thing I remember from Valhalla was there's an animation like you're kneading bread in a market stall, which you can do at certain points. Um, yeah, this is a nice summary, actually. So this is from Serverland. You use the normal flow of city life to become unnoticeable. I kind of like that. That's a nice summary. And Six Key said it connects with the second tenant. hide in plain sight. What do you think, Declan, to those comments?
I think they're very valid comments, but I think they highlight the biggest problem of the franchise is there is no clear definition built by the franchise of what social stealth is. Every fan has their own interpretation because aside from AC1, the franchise has just foregone it for other mechanics. So we've, as a franchise and fans, have been left to speculate what it means to us. And that's great if we look at the viewpoint of Assassin's Creed is about our play style and has been for years. But as a mechanic, what's the true definition? Because we don't know. Is it environmental? Is it actually social? And on about Valhalla, and not to be rude, that kneading bread thing was stupid because you're there in your big ass furry cloak kneading bread. Here's my comment. No
Yes.
one's
Oh
kneading
my
bread
god.
dressed to the nines in a gold plated leaf thing. If I saw that in my market, I'd think it'd be suspicious and I'd be pulling them
Yeah.
straight away.
Yeah. That's a fair point. It's interesting, isn't it? And we've had quite a wide range of comments. Some people never used it, didn't understand it. Others really miss it. Others are a bit more, you know, include it if it's useful, but otherwise I'm okay. So it's a real mixed set of comments. All right, Declan, conclusion time. Why don't you sum up for us?
My summary would be that social stuff isn't a core mechanic in the sense of it needs to be in everything. Social stealth is an addedness to the stealth that should always be in Assassin's Creed. But for Ubisoft to kind of like increase the use for social stealth, instead of just focusing on missions, give us a playability option that would be fun. And if I have to strip all my weapons and wear a civilian outfit and only have my hidden blade for blendness, that is possibly the most genius idea ever because you're using hidden blades.
It's awesome, isn't it? I really like that
Yeah,
idea.
it reminds me of the old spy films where you would like go in with nothing at all and just blend into casino. And you know what? Do it because that'd be epic. Just put all my stuff in a little chest, go into a city with my hidden blade, get
Mm.
right next to a guard, pat him on the back, stab him in the back with the hidden blade, go home, get my sword, back into the city. That would be phenomenal. And that would be something I would praise Ubisoft for doing.
All right. And on that bombshell, I think we'll end the episode.
Sounds perfect. Been good to talk again.
It's been good to catch up, mate. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone who commented and shared their thoughts on Discord, on YouTube, or on Twitter. Really appreciate it. It was really good to read through them and think about what this means. Should it be there? Shouldn't it? Is it a problem? I don't know. I'm okay with having a few different varieties of games. I'll just go back to my earlier point. It is a shame when it's been polished and made to work in Mirage and then it's kind of dropped. But I do understand, from a project management and sort of development point of view, it may not have been possible. But yeah, there we are. Declan, thank you very much for joining us. And we will be back very soon.